We are now recording the meeting and I will begin to live stream it on Facebook.
Well, good evening. My name is Ross Brady, and this is the Planning and Zoning Committee meeting for Community Board 11 with our manager, Marnie is here, Ms. Elias Pavia, and we have a presentation today, which we should just, from City Planning, that we can just go ahead and begin. If Marnie, if you have a few words to say on it, if not, we'll give the floor right over.
I'm just beginning the live stream. So just give one moment. I believe while I'm waiting for that to initiate, we have Colin Lee from the Brooklyn Borough Office of the Department of City Planning and Leah Flax from MTA.
Yes, I'm going to share my screen. Good evening, everyone.
Welcome.
I think it says the host disabled screen sharing.
Okay, we're live streaming and ready to go.
Well, welcome again to our friends from City Planning. The floor is now yours. You're with CB11 Zoning and Planning. Welcome.
Good evening. If the host could allow me to share my screen.
Sure. Okay.
Can everyone see?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Colin Lee, and I'm the newly assigned planner for CD11 at DCP in the Brooklyn office. So joined here by Leah Flax from the MTA, and she will be presenting with me today. And we will be presenting zoning for accessibility, our most recent text amendment. And Leah, I will hand it over to you to start.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you so much, CB11, for having us here. My name is Leah. I'm with MTA New York City Transit, and just wanted to cover a few things before I hand it back over to Colin about what this text amendment means for the MTA. Next slide. So the MTA and DCP are proposing a citywide zoning text amendment that will allow the MTA to work more efficiently with private developers to achieve our system-wide accessibility goals more quickly. The proposal includes two parts. Only one is relevant here to your board, and that is the system-wide transit easement requirement. The expanded transit improvement bonus does not apply to BK11 because it's only for high density areas. Next. So where are we right now with accessibility? Most of our subway stations were built before 1950 and didn't include accessibility. We've been making progress through our capital programs, but we still have a long way to go. So of our 493 subway and Staten Island rail stations, 136, or about 28%, are currently accessible. And of the Long Island Railroad and Metro North stations that are within the 5 boroughs, 25 of 39 are accessible. And when I say accessible, that can include many features to make stations accessible to and usable by individuals with disabilities. And this text amendment, what we're talking about today, really focuses on vertical accessibility. Next. So we think that this text amendment can help a lot, but also we have made a historic commitment from our through our 2020-2024 capital program to increase accessibility. So in that program, we are dedicated to making 77 more stations accessible. And once those are completed, 43% of transit stations versus the current 28 will be accessible. And that represents about 60% of where our riders are, with the goal for no rider to be more than 2 stations away from an accessible station. So we are still absolutely committed and doing that, but this text amendment can help us move even more quickly. And so to talk about that, I'm going to turn it back over to Colin about really what are the specifics of the text amendment.
Thank you, Leah. Today's zoning tools are in place to help alleviate some of the burdens and support construction of transit improvements. And as Leah mentioned before, the 2 transit relating zoning provisions in place today are transit easement requirements and station improvement bonuses. These tools leverage station access improvements in places where investment is already occurring. And they also ensure that opportunities for coordinating developments and station improvements are evaluated and realized. As a result, we get a better designed station inside, and we also get better sidewalk environment outside because the station entrance has been located off the sidewalk. Also, these zoning provisions help to speed up delivery of transit improvements as well. But each of these tools has their limitations. Easement provisions address the challenges of locating new station entrances and other transit amenities. An easement is a legal right to use another's land for a specific limited purpose. In other words, it is a small permanent space reserved in a building for a transit agency to use in a future use. Transit easements have traditionally been used to provide space for new station entrances, passageways, and auxiliary facilities that support subway lines such as emergency egresses and ventilation structures. However, in the zoning resolution today, these provisions have a very limited coverage, and they only apply in areas of the city, such as along 2nd Avenue for the 2nd Avenue subway line, and the most recent Special Inwood District. Also, the zoning resolution does not currently provide a consistent citywide approach for facilitating transit easements on development sites around transit stations. And as a result of these limitations, there have been missed opportunities for the MTA to locate ADA access at optimal locations on development sites next to the station. And to address some of these limitations of these zoning provisions, we are proposing zoning for accessibility. This proposal seeks to create more opportunities for accessibility throughout the transit system through the zoning tools available to us. And one of these components of this proposal is a citywide easement requirement that will address some of these limitations. As a part of this requirement, all developments and enlargements on zoning lots with 50 feet of mass transit stations and in applicable zoning districts would need to file an application with the MTA and the city planning chairperson to determine whether an easement on a zoning lot is needed to help facilitate station access improvements in the future. Applicable districts include residential districts that support multifamily buildings, which are generally more compatible with transit station entrances and other transit-related uses. These districts also include R5 commercial districts with a commercial overlay, R5D districts, and districts with higher density levels as well. Also, medium and high density commercial and all of manufacturing districts would also be subject to this requirement, as development in some of these districts are more easily able to accommodate station entrances. And while the process of obtaining a certification will be required for most sites within 50 feet of a transit station, it is anticipated that the MTA will only ask for an easement in limited places that are most optimal for future transit access around each station. And right here is a map displaying all of the proposed easement stations in Community District 11, along with the 50-foot area of applicability for the station. And in order to facilitate easement agreements in the future, targeted relief from certain zoning limits would be provided to maximize potential challenges for construction on a site subject to the proposed requirement. So that means basically easement areas can affect development sites in a number of ways. The easement itself takes up floor area on a, basically the easement itself takes up floor area on a site and can reduce the available floor area for the development itself. The shape and size of the easement can also occupy a large amount of space within a development's building envelope. This not only affects the direct area that is occupied by the easement, but it also has implications for construction feasibility around that area. Also, easements can also restrict available space to provide for ground floor uses and parking spaces. And depending on the type of development, it may create compatibility issues with more sensitive uses such as apartment units and also other residential uses. Without any zoning relief, easements can limit construction of a development to its full potential, and in certain situations can result in buildings that lack any relationship with the future use of the easement. If the provision of an easement makes it challenging for a development to be built, it would be much more difficult for the transit agency to acquire the easement. And in conclusion, zoning for accessibility proposes a zoning text amendment to establish a framework for coordinating the siting and provision of the transit station improvements with new developments on adjacent sites. As part of this framework, a required consultation process would apply to all developments and enlargements on zoning lots within 50 feet of mass transit stations and applicable zoning districts where easements are needed. Targeted relief from certain zoning limits would be provided to such developments and enlargements in order to maximize potential challenges for construction on a site subject to the proposed requirement. Also for sites that are below 5,000 square feet or where conversions are proposed, the requirement would not apply. And also the provision of easements is voluntary on such sites and where provided may also receive zoning relief as well. In addition to the proposed set of relief, further use, bulk parking, loading, and streetscape modifications would be available pursuant to the discretionary review and approval. And as we mentioned before, in addition to this new system-wide easement and framework, the text amendment would also include an expanded transit bonus mechanism, but this bonus mechanism would not apply in CD11 since there are no R9 and R10 zoning districts in CD11. And for such sites, basically, for such sites providing a transit improvement, modifications to other zoning provisions would be available pursuant to additional discretionary review and approval. And also, the zoning for accessibility citywide text amendment has been referred out on April 5th of this year to all 59 community boards. It also went to borough boards and borough presidents, and they have 60 days to review. And we would like to thank you all for allowing us to come speak to you this evening, and we're happy to answer any questions and hear any feedback.
Well, thank you. I have one just clarification, I guess. For existing structures, this talks about development and new developments where there'd be an easement. If there's an existing structure where the MTA wants to build, would this amendment kick in anytime the owner of the land does any work in front, or just when the MTA has a proposal? In other words, I own a building, you would say it's mixed, it's residential, and I want to do something on the sidewalk or change the frontage, and I either get a variance to do it or I don't need a variance to do it. Does this kick in to where now an easement will be applied for automatically? Does that make does any development, any work equal development, does that make it subject to, to a possible easement? And is it an application? Will you be seeking to do this by eminent domain if you can't get an easement for something that is in the public interest?
It's not based on where we want to put elevators. It's based on the work that they're doing. Colin, can you speak to what triggers it?
Marnie? We have another representative from Department of City Planning that can answer this question. I'm not sure if she's a panelist or not. Her name is Amy Jin.
Hi. So to answer your question, the easement provision, so the easement requirement would only be triggered if it is new construction or an enlargement. And so if you're doing any sort of like facade work, that wouldn't, you wouldn't trigger this requirement of going to the MTA.
Okay, and just for if something, I don't know if in this district, like you said, there'll be any entrances that would be inside a building or even in front of the building. Just thinking as an attorney, are there any insurance and indemnification issues that go along with the easement? If I'm a building owner and I now have thousands of more, hundreds, whatever it is, more people coming into my building, my insurance is definitely going to go up, unless there's some kind of, I guess, some kind of indemnification from the city.
That's a really interesting question, and I don't know if any of us know the answer to it right now, but we can definitely take this back and get back to you with the answer.
I have some questions. I have a varied amount. Leah said that this text amendment was with private developers along with the transit. Can you describe that relationship? What is it exactly about?
So the text amendment is what would require the review. And we would be looking at where are they building, where could the easement potentially be? Would that facilitate accessibility or not? So it'd be a review of sort of the design and existing structures.
Well, Colin mentioned, and I know can you show that map again of Community Board 11's, where you were looking at? Because at the end, you mentioned that you have the ability to give some sort of zoning relief to those who are, I don't know if it's the developers or people who already are there. And you also showed like an example of West 9th Street and why there was a developer who built a really beautiful building right next to the train station, the elevated train station, and that would have been a perfect time to get the easement in. Why isn't it after the fact? Can't you do something with that building? Is that something that are you looking at existing buildings and working with the landlords to get an easement, or to do something where they allow that amount of space for handicapped or disabled to be able to get in? So that's vertical accessibility. Is that what you, Leah, can you explain that to the vertical accessibility to me? Because I've never heard of it before.
Sure. And I think, Amy, maybe you can answer part of this, but so vertical accessibility is really mainly talking about elevators. Okay. And versus instead of stairs. And this would not apply to existing buildings. It wouldn't be until it's passed that if a building such as that one on 9th Street was getting built, that it would trigger the consultation, and we would be able to say, hey, I mean, that was illustrative. but this is where we'd like an easement because you could connect here to this elevated structure. Once it's built, it would not, it would have to be re-triggered by that threshold of them doing new construction or an enlargement. Then we would go back to that building, but just them existing, we would not go to them and ask if we were going to get an easement through. It would be a separate process where we would, have to buy the easement from them.
What about in the situation, I'm sorry, if anybody else wants to ask, I'm thinking another situation where the stairs are going down. So for example, there's a Smith and Carroll on Smith Street and 2nd Street. There used to be a train station with staircases going down. And it wasn't until recently or the last 10, 15 years that they built a building above that. So is that what you mean by working with developers? Like if we have areas on 20th Avenue where you're taking the stairs going down, and then that landlord who is living near the train station would get like extra like benefits for giving out easements? I'm trying to, lots of questions. Do you understand what I mean? Like, is it something that a building that's already existing and that's near the train station you're given the easement to make an entrance for, it wouldn't be an elevator. So yeah, how would that work?
I can take this. So the easements are, this easement requirement specifically for ZFA only applies to new construction or enlargements. So if you already exist or you're under construction, you don't go through this process anymore because it's been like past its time, I guess. This process kicks in when the developer goes to DOB to file construction permits. The benefits to the developer for exchange of this easement space is that they're able to reallocate that ground floor area elsewhere in their building. So that space that they've set aside for the easement for the elevator would not be counted in their development floor area. And so there are additional reliefs to sort of accommodate this, because as you can imagine, if they're digging underground and they need an easement in the cellar level, then that cuts into some of the parking spaces that they might need. And so a part of the relief is to waive 15 spaces to accommodate for that. Of course, if the developer wants to provide more parking, they can as a response to maybe community outreach, or similarly, if the community feels that they don't want more parking, they can also come to city planning for a special permit to waive all parking, but that's a very separate discussion. And also one of the other reliefs that is available is there's an additional height allowance just in case that floor area can't be accommodated in the envelope that currently exists for the zoning. So like let's say if a zoning district has a maximum height of 75 feet and with this easement, they have an extra like 3,000 square feet that they can't fit within 75 feet. So they can go up another 10 feet to have that space on top of their building. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. You understood it.
I have a question. Does that apply, those bonuses and waivers, to properties within CB11, even though they're not included in the bonus
So
space?
the bonus is a separate program for only
Okay.
R9 and R10, and that's a bonus of 20% of the floor area if the developer provides significant improvements. So if they do the construction itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be clear that there are certain incentives.
Yes, there are,
Owners
but they're
within.
reserved for the highest density districts so far.
Mhm. And just a quick question, because in our district, the N line runs over DOT bridges, the station. So you will have something in the text amendment that spells out the agreement between the city-owned property and MTA access?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure. So along the N line, it's underground, and we have the sidewalks, and the street space is owned or maintained by the Department of Transportation, Bureau of Bridges, while MTA actually has the tracks and the retaining walls. They have the sidewalks and the bridges, right? So will you include something so that the Department of Transportation works with MTA on those easements? Is that necessary? Or I would just hate to see down the road that.
We would address it on a, a case-by-case basis. So where there might be a station that is abutting or partially on DOT property, we have existing agreements with them with their master lease, like DOT owns all the streets.
Okay.
And we have with them a master lease for our easement for the subway below ground, or it might be above ground. And so whatever the specific location is where there's a station, if there's sort of mixed ownership, yeah, we would work with them. We'd work that out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. On the easement, who would be responsible for maintaining the elevator or the structures that has been developed within the building?
Hi. So for the easements, those would still be elevators that would be built by the MTA. And so if it's built by us, we would be maintaining them. And some of the other places where they would be getting the bonus and they would build it themselves, it could then go either way, where we work out an agreement where they pay us and we maintain it, or they're maintaining it, but that doesn't really apply here. So anywhere where we're having the easement and we build it, we would be maintaining it.
Would these elevators also be part of the building that it's built into, or would it be a separate entity in the in front of the building? Meaning, would it be a separate entrance, or you'd be able to access it through the building?
They would be, I would think they would generally be open to the street, and that buildings wouldn't want people going through the building, but I feel like I can't say that with certainty. Like in Manhattan, there's entrances that are in buildings, but those are usually ones where they built it and they maintain it. So I'm not sure that you would have that case here. The easement would probably be, open to the street.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because Russ asked a question regarding the insurance, and depending on who owns the elevator and whether it's physically part of the building, who would be responsible for the insurance of that entity and the building itself?
I thought that was an excellent question. And so we have 498 stations, and some of them do have entrances that are, they're called developer entrances. So our real estate group, they work with them, and they're going to have the answer to this question. I don't know, but I know it must come up with those buildings, like you're saying, the liability of, slip, trip, and fall, whose liability is it? So we will get back to you on that.
And would this zoning be mandatory, or would it be, is it a mandatory zoning, or, would it be up to the developer?
So the text amendment is citywide, and the requirement for going to the MTA is mandatory. So it's a requirement that if you're within 50 feet of the station footprint and you want to redevelop or enlarge, you need to contact the MTA and seek this certification from the chairperson of the City Planning Commission. The certification can go either way, and in most cases, it would be determined that there's no easement that's necessary. It's only, again, as Colin presented, only very specific spaces at like the most optimal locations will be asked for an easement. And that would be required as well.
Okay.
But the process is mandatory for everybody who falls within that 50 foot radius, that they would have to come in and talk to the MTA and make sure that the MTA does not want an easement.
A question, Ruben Cologne. I'm assuming this has been done already. In the case of developers being allowed to build taller or higher, how much space are we talking here? Is there a maximum that would be allowed? A minimum requirement there?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question? I apologize.
Yeah, I'm assuming that this has been done already in certain locations. Is there a maximum allowance given to developers that are willing to allow for the easement?
This hasn't been done before, so this would be a new program.
Okay, the question still remains. How far is the MTA willing to allow developers to go with regard to height on a building? 1, 2 floors, 3 floors?
Oh, so
I'm
your
assuming
question
it depends
is,
on.
sorry, so your question is for that easement space, that the displaced floor area, how high the allowance is to replace it in their building, right?
Yes. Correct.
It is up to 20 feet. So 2 stories, up to 2 stories. In most cases, we don't see that happening. Of course, there's the allowance for it, but the kind of the amount of floor area that would be displaced because of an easement likely would not fill 2 stories.
Understood. Thank you.
I have another question about when you're doing this, it will be decided by the MTA, but it's not like a case by case where you can come back to us or to whichever community district to say, this is what our plan is, and this is a developer that's asking to build 6-story high in front of, let's say, a landmark church. I'm thinking the old Dutch church or something. Is there something that you can guarantee our district that we have some input into, what the MTA decides once we allow, we agree? Because it's a really great thing that you're doing. I think this is wonderful. The disability, so many people need elevators, but at the same time, you don't want to take away from the neighborhood's characteristics, and we don't want to take away from people's sun and airspace. Well, we still want to make sure that it's done in a very considerate way. So that's all I'm asking. Would it be a case by case basis? Are we going to be part of that? Or is that once we pass it, that's it? It's just up to the MTA and the developer.
So as the text amendment is written currently, there is no referral to the community board for this, for the certification process. However, if that's something that the board feels should be included, please include that in any sort of recommendation letter that you send us.
Great, thank you.
Oh, I just wanted to ask Victoria, are you referencing not just the easement, but like, say for instance, like it was like the easement and included like also a rezoning? Are you talking about in that situation?
Well, if we have an easement and we're working with a developer who wants to build and also give money, well, basically the MTA is going to win by having more accessibility, but also they're getting the developers to pay for building the accessibility and giving up some of that space. And then to reward the developers, we want to make sure that if they're going to construct, it's not going to take away from the characteristic of the neighborhood. We don't want a landmark place or any, we don't want just it built anywhere or in too tall a manner. We still want to have some input. And that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm suggesting. That's what I think would work best.
Totally understood. I just want to clarify that the bonus mechanism, so the bonus mechanism is tied to the developer constructing improvements. That would not apply here. So the developer is not constructing any sort of like subway improvements when they provide an easement. It's just the reservation of the space for when the MTA comes in to construct the elevator by themselves. So in terms of like the heights, all of that will be a case-by-case basis for the discretionary allowances if they do want to build even higher, but they are still subject to the underlying zoning. And so they wouldn't be able to top that.
And what about the designing of that easement? Like, will we have some greens, perhaps some trees to make it, presentable? Just,
So there are also some flexibility with streetscape improvements included in this text amendment, just to make sure that they don't conflict with the uses of the easement. So for example, street trees and tree pits, there would be flexibility in locating them so that they're not in the way of the entrance of the subway. Things like curb cuts would not be allowed within, I believe it's 30 feet of the entrance, so that people coming out of the subway don't suddenly get accosted by a car coming out of a driveway. But in terms of the design and the location of the easement, so far there is no component that includes like the community board weighing in. The discussion will be primarily for the MTA looking for an ideal site for that elevator.
Great, thank you.
And I just want to add to what Amy was saying, just when we talk about ideal site, let's say you had like the 9th Street picture, which I know is not in your district, elevated subway station, and there's a platform with a station on either end. So once you're on the station level, you're on the platform level. Well, we don't need an elevator that's going to go to the middle of the platform. We need ones that go to the stations. So if your building is within 50 feet, but it's in the middle of the platform, we wouldn't take an easement or do anything with the easement there because an elevator would not be helpful. So just that's what we're talking about, ideal location.
Okay, I have a question regarding maintenance of the easements. New York City, some winters we get hit with snow and ice. Who would be responsible for the maintenance of the elevator, the sidewalks around it? Would it be the property owner, or would MTA, as part of the station clearing operations, clear those areas?
Throughout the city, we are responsible for the area within 3 feet of a subway entrance. And then usually beyond that, a sidewalk, it's owned by the city and it's the responsibility of the building owner. So that would still apply.
But unfortunately, we have building owners, as you know, that aren't such great neighbors and don't clear. So I would hate to see someone who needs that ADA elevator and 2 days after snow has fallen, it's still not maintained or shoveled. So that's something for us to think about as well. Thank you.
I have, Leah, you mentioned that the elevators that if a station is in the middle of the block, you would need an elevator for that. Is that correct?
Potentially, it depends on, it really depends on the specific station. So I'm not saying there's no mid-block locations.
So my question is, these elevators for the assessment encasement, is that going to the platform or is it only going to the station level?
So within a given station, we might need, 1, 2, 3, 4, it depends, elevators to make it accessible, because you have to be able to get to the station and you have to be able to get to the platform. Some stations have a single middle platform, some have 2 separate bi-directional platforms. So it would really be up dependent on what the location was, what we would need.
Okay, so, but the bottom line is the platform, the train platform will have ADA accessibility. Is that correct?
Yes, until
Okay.
you can get from the turnstiles to up to the turnstiles or down to the turnstiles and to the platform, it's not fully accessible.
And how would this handle stations that only have direction in one way and you have to go to the other side of the street to get the other direction? We don't have any in our zone, but there is in like 4th Avenue. They have southbound on one side and northbound on the other side. There's no, cross within
Right.
the station.
So in that case, you would need at least 2 to get from the mezzanine to the platform. And then the question is, how do you get from the street to the mezzanine? And so does that
No,
require
that's-
1 or 2?
No, the development's being built on, say, on the southbound 4th Avenue side. Okay, they have an elevator being built in that development. Okay, so they would have ADA accessibility. The other side, across the street, has no ADA. There's no elevator on that side. There's no development.
Right.
What happens to that side of the street?
Right. You would build the one that you can with the new development that's triggered by whatever they're doing. And the station would not be considered fully ADA accessible. We have that now where some stations, you have only one line and the station is accessible, or only one direction. And then we prioritize doing the other side, but it might not, it might not be at the same time.
Okay.
I have another question about the elevators, the vertical accessibility. So if the elevators are going to be a certain measurement around, and then you would have somebody maintaining them on a regular basis, you would have cameras, safety cameras to make sure it's safe inside, that nothing's going on. Like how is it managed? I'm just, because now you're going to have a lot more in all over the city. So how are you managing the safety and the maintenance of these elevators? Keeping them from being vandalized, et cetera. Is happening too?
And that, the technology and how we do elevators is improving all the time, thankfully. So now they're equipped with much better monitoring technology where we get alerts when they go out. So it doesn't, of course, please report the elevator when it's out, but we are getting alerts and we can dispatch teams to address it. And we have certain standards by the time they have to address it by. I don't know that much about our elevator technology and what is standard right now versus what we're hoping to have on our newer elevators. So I'd have to get back to you with more details.
I have a suggestion. Wouldn't it be great if the MTA and the police department in each district can have some sort of like signal if there is something going on and the elevator's out, so if there's a disabled person stuck, that they have some sort of communication. I don't know if you already have that, but that's something I thought of just now.
There are, help call buttons, just like we have our help points at the station where you can use that to get help or information.
I'm on. Okay. Hi, is there a possibility that you could send this presentation via email to Marnie so she could share it with us?
Yeah, at the end of tonight, I'll send the
Thank you.
presentation directly to Marnie. So y'all
Thank
can have
you.
a copy.
Well, thank you. I think what we'd like to do is to thank our friends from City Planning for coming. There are no further questions, and take this up in our committee meeting and, possibly have a public hearing on it. But let's mull over any other questions we might have and just thank our city planning friends for coming today. With that, I thank you all. We can adjourn today's meeting or presentation. We'll do so and wish you well. Thank you.
Thanks for
Good-
having us.
Good night. and
Thank you,
Godspeed.
everyone.